All right.
So hello, Matt, Adair, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today for this negotiation course for the UCL School of Management. So I'd love if you could get started by just introducing yourself and telling us what it is that you used to do.
All right. Yeah. My name is Matt Adair. I'll give you the super condensed bio. I went to NYU to study finance and banking to become an investment banker. And during my freshman year, we actually went to go to an investment bank and talk to alumni and see what their day-to-day work life was like. And I took one meeting at an investment bank and decided I never want to do that again in my entire life. And I quickly switched majors, and being in New York City, there was a brand new kind of entertainment, media, and technology in the business department major. So I jumped over to that. Got an internship at NBC, which got me a assistant job at HBO doing their comedy festivals. And that was where I met a bunch of comedy agents who then got me a position as an assistant at a talent agency, where I then eventually became a music agent, booking agent to be specific, which is the person that handles all of the live performances for an artist, which I did for 10 years. And then decided that that was not something I wanted to be doing anymore. And I took my leave. And, I still miss it, still talk to a lot of the people, but, I'm doing different things now.
Okay, so what exactly does a music agent do, or a booking agent?
So musicians, actors, comedians, whatever, are insanely talented individuals, but they are good at what they do. And the business end is kind of a different wheelhouse, a different set of skills than what they're expected to do. So agents kind of fill that gap because they are dealing with business professionals, highly savvy people, and to be able to make sure that they are being represented fairly and getting the best conditions for themselves. That's what we do, that we negotiate on their behalf. And through our network of people, know the opportunities available to them that they may not be aware of, and bring those to them for them to consider.
So what would have been a typical negotiation for you?
So for music specifically, there's kind of a series of middlemen that I'll kind of run you through here. Like, you think when you go to a concert, like the venue's paying the band and that's kind of the deal. The venue may or may not be owned by the promoter. The promoter's the person that's actually selling the tickets. Sometimes they own the venue, sometimes they're renting the venue from someone else. The promoter talks to us, who negotiate the deal with them. We will normally talk to a manager or directly with the artist, but normally we go through the manager. Then the manager is the direct link to the artist. So kind of every communication goes through all those different channels, and that's why it's very important that we're very specific, because there's a lot of places along there that information can get mixed up or reinterpreted, and so that's why we're always
so it sounds like
yeah.
It sounds like there's a lot of agents. Is this right? It's the venue, and then maybe a promoter, and then you, and then the manager, and then the artist.
Yeah, so the venue
the artist
isn't really,
and the stage is.
yeah, like the venue and the stage is less part of the deal. It's less part of the negotiation. That's just kind of one of the deal points where it's going to happen.
Right.
The promoter is the one that is paying the artist, and they're the ones collecting all the ticket revenue.
So are you working on behalf of the promoter or on behalf of the artist? Or
we're working on behalf of the artist to negotiate with the promoter. So if you kind of imagine that if there's a venue with 1,000 seats, you want to find a band that can sell 1,000 seats, then the question is, well, what's the maximum ticket price that you can charge and still sell those seats? And then what's the split between the promoter and the artist, and how do you split that up fairly? And then you have to factor in the various expenses. And I can give you hypotheticals if you want.
Sure.
Or
yeah,
so let's go with that 1,000-seat venue. There is 1,000 seats actually fairly small. So we'll say it's a kind of artist with maybe like a up and coming radio single that people know, but like they probably haven't bought the album, but they might be interested in seeing them. So that's probably a $30 to $40 ticket. There's these days there's the VIP tickets that if you get the meet and greet beforehand, that's a huge auxiliary revenue thing. And in negotiation terms, like the problem is there is a a lot of unknown information and there's asymmetrical information. And that's where the negotiation takes point, that we, as the band's advocate, believe wholeheartedly that they're going to sell 1,000 tickets at $50 a ticket,
Right.
which would be $50,000. The promoter doesn't, may not feel the same way. They're not certain, if this is a new artist in a market they haven't played a lot of times before, there's not a strong history. So they would like that to happen. That's the best outcome for everyone imaginable. But how do they hedge in case the fact we only sell half the venue?
Yeah.
And so there's numerous ways to structure a deal, and kind of how that structure kind of reflects the level of risk involved on both parties. That we would like it to be, give us X amount of dollars and we'll just show up and play the show. That's the zero risk to the artist. All the risk goes on the promoter. If the band gets paid $40,000, they only get $30,000 in ticket sales. That doesn't affect the artist. That costs the promoter a ton of money, but that doesn't affect us. So normally deals fall somewhere short of that, where you get a small guarantee and then a split of the ticket sales. And that could be 50-50, 60-40, 70, anywhere along there. And every point of that is negotiable.
So does it usually end up with some combination of a guarantee and a contingency-based fee?
Yeah, that's the standard. It's kind of and all of this is all pre-COVID. That I'm sure post-COVID these deals are going to look drastically different, because
Right.
now the amount of unknown information and asymmetry is off the charts.
It's interesting. I'm really glad to hear you frame this. So we cover this topic in class. We call it contingency contracts, and I'm really glad to hear you framing it in terms of this risk sharing, because that's exactly how it is. And I just want to mention for my students watching this, to link back to when we talked about like probability and things like that. That's exactly what's going on under the hood with these kinds of things.
And one of kind of the interesting things, sorry.
Oh, please go ahead.
One of the interesting things when you're dealing with artists is that if you're negotiating over the cost of a car, the car doesn't really get a say in what the final deal looks like. So each individual band also kind of has their preferences. That there are bands that were, home run shows that I could tell you with very, very high certainty what range their ticket sales were going to fall in, but they would still like to do these kind of high risk shows where they would take a $0 guarantee, but take an incredibly large split of the ticket sales.
Oh, the artists were pushing for this.
Yes, because they were confident in themselves. They're like, don't give us any money up front, but give us 90% of the ticket sales.
So, okay, that brings us to a great topic, as we were chatting about earlier, just the role of the agents, and this is something we discuss in the class, and how you're managing multiple interests. You're managing your own interest as well as the interests of the artist. You may even have a higher level of expertise in terms of, what's likely to be good for them in the long run, versus they may be going off of, these emotionally driven beliefs about their skill or their ability to sell. So I would just love to hear you talk generally about that role of the agent and the go-between, and what are some of the challenges that you face?
In terms of like conflict of interest, or just the job as an agent and the day-to-day challenges of the actual work?
Well, I'd like to hear, but let's start with the kind of big picture. If you don't bring up the conflict of interest, I'll make sure I ask you about that.
So I specifically worked primarily 90% what I wrote was to work with casinos, which are kind of a unique venue in the fact that they give away so many of their tickets that the traditional ticket sales don't, the splits don't work, that you can't get 60% of a ticket that they comp to a high roller.
Right.
So the hardest part for me when I first started the job was I was aware of casinos that existed in Las Vegas and Atlantic City. And that was, in my mind, that was the world of casinos. And then I discovered the amazing world of native tribe casinos, of which there are over 400 in the United States. And they have venues ranging in size from like 100-seat lounges to the Mohegan Sun and Foxwoods in Connecticut, which have, 20,000, 30,000 person arenas.
It's interesting. I never thought of how much that network expands the performance space. That's interesting. Yeah. And so you were booking nationwide, is that right?
Booking nationwide. I started as a two-man team that eventually the volume grew that we ended up being a five-person team. So then we had it divvied up into territories, and I was everything west of Las Vegas.
Okay.
Um,
So I want to bring you back to this idea of agents in terms of working on behalf of the clients. You're talking about sometimes they wanted deals that you wouldn't necessarily have recommended. What other kind of challenges did you encounter in terms of negotiating on the behalf of someone else?
well, one of the
You
biggest
often
things
have to
about
check back. What?
being a
Go ahead.
casino is that casinos are not sexy, exciting venues.
Right.
That if you ask a band where they want to play, it's Madison Square Garden or somewhere like that. But there's often a better deal to be had if you take the less desirable, like the high draw places know that they're a high draw and they know that they can make a lower offer, and that prestige has a value to the artist. And
Interesting.
that prestige has less value to us in a dollars and pennies sense, but in a terms of building their career, of course, we want someone playing the Garden. That builds their standing as an artist. But in terms of making a tour work financially, kind of convincing them to do some of these venues that they wouldn't normally consider, a lot of fairs and festivals and private events and casinos, which aren't the big draws.
So, and it sounds like that's somewhat a conflict of interest in the sense that you're, obviously for your company motivated to bring in as much revenue as possible as a kind of the deal, but also versus the artists who have other interests in mind, their longer term goals. But it sounds like that did align a little bit in terms of your interest in their long term goals. Is that right?
So there are kind of, to overgeneralize, two ways that agencies do their work. Some agencies are kind of I have my clients and I do everything for them. So I will get every offer for them, confirm every deal. And then what the system I worked under was more of a kind of team approach, where I had my section of venues in my territory that any offer coming from those venues came through me to anyone on the entire roster.
Okay.
So that way we could come to an artist and say, this is the tour we put together for you. On this given Thursday, you can work a festival, you can work a casino, you can work a club, you can work a outdoor venue. And here's the pros and cons of all of them. And here's what we think you should do. And then they would come back with what they wanted. And then we would finesse the deal that they were most interested in and have the others as fallbacks. So it wasn't always a conflict of interest. They obviously, like, it looked better on me if I could confirm more deals and get more money for the artist. But if I gave the manager options, that ultimately satisfied what they were looking for.
Okay, yeah, and that's definitely something we've talked about in this course, this idea of multiple offers as a way to get create value. I'm curious, when you're offering, so one of the things we talk about in terms of making multiple offers, you try to make them as equivalent as possible from your perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you were doing there?
So normally we would, have the offer that we wanted, and then if we had a fallback offer, then we would try to push the terms up on that one as best we could, knowing that there was I forget the negotiation, but there was a secondary offer that was also one that we would accept, just not prefer. So knowing that if something happened with the first offer, that we were still in a good position. But what we liked to offer were things that, particularly in casinos, were of high value to the venue, but did not cost the artist, like doing meet and greets, doing signing merchandise, doing radio promos to help sell the show. Like, that costs us nothing, but generates value for the promoter. That they might, that they would give us extra cash or extra hotel rooms or cost towards food or flights in exchange for those things that didn't cost us anything.
How is it that costs you nothing? Where's that value coming from?
Because for the artists that hang out backstage an hour before the show and do a meet and greet and shake the hands of like the VIPs that they wanted to bring in.
Okay.
That's just them hanging out backstage.
So it costs nothing in dollars and cents. I guess it's coming out of the artist's time in that sense.
Yes, and there are artists who refuse to do that. And we knew that going into that was not something that we could put up on the offer.
Right. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about some of the challenges associated with agent negotiations, these conflicts of interest or disagreements about what's important. I'm curious if you ever felt yourself at an advantage by being an agent and not directly being the person who was tied to the deal, not being the car, as it were.
And I don't know if I felt at an advantage. There were many times that I was not the person, taking the risk. Like,
Hmm.
one of the reasons that I don't miss doing what I did as much is that my job was to get the best deal for the artist. That was my obligation, even if I knew it was not a good deal for the promoter. And these were promoters that I talked with every single day of the week over years and years and years. And I knew that they were walking into, a bloodbath where they would lose tons of money, but I could not tell them that because that would not be in my artist's best interest.
So that's an interesting point. Yeah, I remember you mentioning that when we were chatting the other day. Um, it's almost paradoxical to me to hear you say your job was to get the best deal for the artist, which of course is totally intuitive. Another lens might be to say your job is to get the best deal for the company that you worked for. In which case you have to consider things like reputation effects and these long-term relationships with the venues. So I'm hearing you say that you left because you didn't like that tension, but while you were still there, or maybe some of your peers, how do you see people navigating that tension?
And again, I want to overgeneralize because this will be a 4-hour interview. At the end of the day, kind of the mindset is that promoters are more replaceable than the artists.
Oh, okay.
That one of the hardest things about being an agent is that we don't have a special proprietary system for booking our shows. That an artist can fire us tomorrow and have an agent at a different agency the next day that knows the exact same people that I do, that knows the market as well as I do.
Right.
So keeping the client happy, particularly keeping the manager happy, because they're the ones that choose the agent, was more important. That if we had to burn a bridge, we were going to burn the bridge with the promoter every single time, because the promoters generally, you'll work with them again and they will, if you don't, if you get burnt once, then that's a bad show. If you repeatedly do a bad deal with them, they'll stop doing work with you. But everyone, you can kind of get a sense of a limit, and they get shuffled around enough within
Right.
their own company and what venues they're booking, that you will get a new person eventually, and then you'll be back in business with that venue again. But there were venues that I knew that like wouldn't send us offers for like a year and a half, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, there's an offer for a band that we were looking for a date for.
Yeah. It sounds like, at least in this area, your interests were mostly aligned then with the artists, although it sounds like there's still this issue for you. It sounds like, if I'm understanding right, a personal or even ethical thing of just knowing that giving as much as you can to the artists that you're serving in your company does mean that, since it's a negotiation, you're taking something else, especially in these kinds of risk balancing moments. Is that what that's about?
My value to the artist is that when I called a promoter, they would pick up the phone. Like,
Right.
if you're an up and coming musician and you want to play a venue, if you call the venue, they're not going to take your call. They're
Right.
in no shortage of people looking to be musicians. That my access was part of my value to the client and why we're allowed to charge them money for what we do.
Yeah.
So if I knew, like, if I did if I got the maximum money, even if it was a bad deal for one artist, it lowered the chance that they would pick up my call the next time, or they would pick it up, but they
Right.
would not give me the same generous offer for the next band or the next band. And I'm sure
It
something
sounds
you guys
honest.
probably talk about in negotiation is how there's a very different mentality if it's a recurring transaction versus a one-time deal. That when you're buying a car, it's zero sum, take no prisoners. But if you're going to that person a week later to get a similar deal, then you need some sort of foundation of trust.
Right. So maybe you really lowball the person you buy your car from, but not so much the person who repairs your car.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's really I think apt point. Absolutely. Yeah. And we definitely talk about reputation effects. So
And
I want to switch
the
gears.
artist doesn't care about ruining my reputation, because they got their
Right.
money, they're playing the show, they're gone. It's the artist behind them in line that pays the price for their decisions.
So I want to shift gears a little bit. We should wrap up in a few minutes, but there's a couple other questions I wanted to ask. Just in terms of the process itself. So as you probably remember from your MBA negotiation classes, we do these like neatly packaged sessions where it's like, okay, you have an hour, sit down, have the negotiation. What was it? I assume that's not actually how it unfolded for you. What was the process like? Was it over a lot of back and forth and phone calls, or did you tend to organize one meeting and just hash it all out?
We never did it over one meeting. It was normally,
Okay.
back and forth emails or a couple phone calls. So basically, either a venue would call, our promoter would call us and say, I need a band that's available this date in this venue, or vice versa. We would send out an email saying the tour is coming through your neck of the woods this week. Please tell us which dates you have available.
Okay.
And then once we learn which venues were available, then we would, we kind of the industry standard, and I don't personally understand why this is the way it's done, is the promoter always sends the offer. We never make
Okay.
an offer to the promoter. So they always make the first offer, and then we normally then tell them it's not enough money regardless of what they send us, and then they send us the offer
Right.
they actually intended to send because they knew that we were going to do that. And there's normally about a 1 week delay while we gather up all those offers, and then we kind of sit together as a team and say, well, which of these are real offers, which, from a money perspective, from a distance and mileage, because these bands have to drive from venue to venue. Like, most of them would rather not do a 9-hour nonstop, drive. If we can do a shorter drive, even if it's for less money, like, that's often preferable. And that's one of the things that goes. So which offers are real, which ones are the most attractive. And then kind of it gets into the nitty gritty of, we think this band can sell tickets at a higher price, so see if they'll be willing to raise the ticket price and offer us more money. And then the promoter will be like, they may believe that they would also, because they want to sell as much too. They want to make more money too, but they want to also sell every single ticket.
Yeah, of course.
And then it becomes a question of, will they include hotels? How much money are they spending on advertising? Is it too much? Is it too little? And then we kind of get into the finer line item details. If we're going to split the ticket sales, about, well, you're spending too much on this, that's going to end up costing us money since we're splitting the expenses.
Right.
And
So
so
you guys start with the big, and then
and normally we will tell a promoter that as far as we're considered, we're going to do the show on your date for this price, and then we get into the nitty gritty. The show isn't confirmed until every last thing is locked in place.
Right.
But we kind of work with the understanding that this is happening, so let's make this happen together.
Right. Okay, that's really interesting. So I want to I'm just watching the clock. We should wrap up, but I want to ask one question before we go. We were chatting about earlier, just kind of the differences between what's happening in the world and what you learn in an MBA negotiation class. I would love to hear you compare or contrast that. What are your thoughts there?
The funniest thing that always struck me is that, I'm sure you said never give away your reservation price. And the first question any promoter always sent me for any date was, well, what's the cheapest they'll take this show at? No matter, like, they knew they weren't getting an answer, but that was always the very first thing. And these are people that I negotiate with all the time, so I'd always shoot back, well, what's the most you'll pay for them? But in terms of disconnect, it's really just how often personality plays into it over rational decision making, because so many things are, when it's asymmetric information, when there's unknown variables, that you have to use your judgment in place of someone else's judgment. And there's often a resistance. Like, I could have a band that I know, if they're playing the LA market and they haven't played the LA market in 3 years, but they played in San Diego last year. And I know that in San Diego, which is a 2-hour drive away, they sold this many tickets. And I give them that information because that information is good for me to share, because it makes it easier for us to complete the deal. There's often pushback saying, well, you're only giving me this information because you want more money, or I'm giving them solid facts that they can verify, but they don't want that because they assume that there's a bias to it. And part of that goes back to the building trust, that when I'm giving someone information, yes, it's for my benefit, but I'm not lying to them because that's going to hurt me in the future. But people's personalities, like, they just don't trust, and so they would rather reject information.
But so some people will trust and some people won't trust. Is that what you're saying?
Yep. And it depends on the person and entirely on the person.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I want to end on that note. I think that's a really nice note to end on, and I appreciate that comparison there. So I'm just gonna wrap up. Thank you again. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for taking the time to talk today. Any final words of advice for people who are going to go out in the world and negotiate?
Just know ahead of time what you're willing to accept and what you're not, and kind of be able to identify when you're in the position of leverage and when you're not, and adapt accordingly. You negotiate very differently when you need something versus when you want something.
All right, cool. Well, thank you
And
so much.
you've got my
Oh,
contact
sorry.
info. If someone has follow-up questions, I'm happy to take them.
Oh, great. Thank you. I'll make sure I share that with them. Oh, I guess it's here
All
now.
right.
All right. I'm going to end this recording. Let's stick around for a minute just
All right.
to chat, but wave to the camera. Thanks so much.
Into the camera. Bye.